Hi, welcome back. We are on part 2 of Sources of Skepticism. We're going to talk now about empiricism, knowledge by the senses, or knowledge by sense experience. Empiricism is the epistemological view that all knowledge arises from sense experience. Radical empiricism goes beyond sense experience to affirm inner or religious experience grounded in intuition, which is what we talked about last time. Empiricism begins with common sense realism, which we also talked about last time. Proof is by seeing and touching. It has been articulated and developed in the British empiricist tradition and has been assumed in much of contemporary analytic philosophy. It has been applied to meaning as well. The meaning of a statement is its method of verification. This is called the Verificationist theory of truth. If there is no empirical way to verify the truth of a statement, that statement is considered meaningless. Empiricism has increasingly been assumed in the natural sciences, and natural science is becoming the stronghold of empiricism. It professes to be the only true source of knowledge, publicly verifiable, and therefore authoritative for all. It is validated by its recurrent technological miracles, and it is in turn richly endowed by public grants for research and development. So, your senses. Do you know by your senses? Science generally, and empiricism particularly, have shown themselves to be vulnerable in a variety of ways. Far from knowing that all knowledge is from sense experience, it may be argued that some knowledge is not from sense experience. For example, there are no square circles. Do you know that? What is a square? What is a circle? What's a square circle? Can you know that there are no square circles apart from seeing one? Again, that is no knowledge from sense experience. It may be argued that some knowledge is not from sense experience. For example, there are no square circles, or that there is no knowledge from sense experience. Pure data of sense experience is not meaningful without interpretation. So we don't have knowledge through our senses because all that comes in through our senses has to be interpreted, and we interpret in light of our basic belief using reason. We do not know the reality of an external world from sense experience, as has been observed by Berkeley, or the reality of mind and causality, argued by Hume, or the reality of substance and identity and unity, a position held by Kant. By means of the senses, we do not know there are essences, or universals, or permanents, or concepts, only particulars and momentary sense impressions. Nominalism, that each thing has its own nature and name, there are no essences. Nominalism, skepticism, and legal positivism have been recurrent in ancient, medieval, and modern philosophy when the senses have become the sole source of knowledge. The antinomy of permanence and change has occurred in the East as well, between Madhyamika Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta. Scientific knowledge is based on observation and is limited by observation. It relies on induction to go from the observed to the unobserved. Induction assumes uniformity of nature. The past and the future are like the present. The forces now operating have always operated and in essentially the same magnitude. Notice these are assumptions. Extended further, how things now operate is said to explain how things originate. Observation can falsify general statements. It cannot verify them. Observation cannot disconfirm the existence of non-physical realities without assuming methodological naturalism, that all phenomena can be explained in natural terms. This in turn assumes metaphysical naturalism, that all of reality is natural, that nothing is supernatural. So, empiricism often goes with materialism And materialism is the same as metaphysical naturalism. So metaphysical naturalism says all that exists is nature. And so methodological naturalism then says all that we could know is nature. But notice, those both are philosophical assumptions, not gotten by our senses. Given these assumptions, all distinctions can and must be reduced to simpler natural terms. Mind must be reduced to the brain, biology to chemistry, chemistry to physics, and physics to geometry and to mathematics. Pythagoras claimed that numbers are things and things are numbers. Is that true? Are they? Within reductionistic explanation, as anomalies multiply, a paradigm shift may occur, but the project goes on. In reductionism, there is no logical or ontological gap between mind and brain, between non-physical mental images and physical neural impulses. There is only the project of empiricism itself, with the promissory note, someday it will be explained naturalistically, or more observation. Science assumes induction and reduction. It assumes uniformity and naturalism, none of which are based on, nor can be based on, observation. By transgressing its stated boundaries, it advocates a dogmatic naturalistic interpretation of the world. With good reason, in postmodern consciousness, the world constructed by science is no longer being privileged. Why? Because postmodernism recognizes that science is not neutral. It has assumptions, and it has a meta-narrative, and all of meta-narratives need to be called out and deconstructed. So we have the assumption of methodological naturalism, all of our knowledge is through the senses, metaphysical naturalism, all that exists is nature. And those are philosophical assumptions that should be tested, and we will test them as we go along. Now, we're talking about sources of skepticism, and here we have reason listed. Reason, its uses, its limits, and its limited use. So remember, all of these can become sources of skepticism. Reason can as well. Reason itself becomes a source of skepticism when it is misused or not fully used. Notice, when it is misused or not fully used. It is misused when used as a source of truth rather than as a test for meaning, which is our first job, right? Test it for meaning. It is not fully used when it is used to construct a worldview and not first used critically as a test for the meaning of one's own basic belief. The antinomy of trusting in reason to know the truth and not trusting in reason to know the truth is grounded in the failure to use reason critically. So remember, reason's not a source of truth first. It's a test for meaning. There are several uses of reason which are to be distinguished and used in order, proceeding from the more basic to the less basic. Reason has been misused as a source of truth. Certain convictions are treated as self-evident to reason and foundational, requiring no further need for defense. René Descartes' cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, is said to be self-evident every time it is thought. So is it self-evident that because you think you exist? Thomas Jefferson took it as self-evident that all men are created equal. These views may be true, but the question is, are they self-evident? Can they be doubted? Are alternative views immediately self-contradictory? Are Hindu, Buddhist, or naturalist views of the self immediately self-contradictory? Or do they require at least a few steps in reasoning to show that they are contradictory? If so, how would Descartes go about showing the steps in reasoning leading to self-contradiction? In showing one's view of the self, must the existence of God first be addressed, and does this require attention in proper order to the ontological, cosmological, and teleological arguments? Clarity is not incompatible with a step-by-step approach in argument and seems to require it if thinking proceeds from what is more basic to what is less basic. That's what we're going to do in the rest of this book. Reason has not been fully used if it is not first used critically at the basic level. Reason is said to have reached its limits when more basic issues of permanence and change, unity and diversity, substance and causality are not first settled. Reason is used to form concepts which grasp the essence of things, the set of qualities which all members have, which they always have, and which distinguish them by the law of identity from non-members. Essences can be questioned where permanence, there must be something eternal, has not been settled. To question the ontological possibility of relationship between A and non-A is to question the possibility of unity, of diversity, and whether anything can exist at all, a point not disputed by many. Who has asked that? Does anything exist? It is not to be assumed that the relationship between A and non-A is necessarily exclusionary, as being and non-being, but it may be complementary, as wise and happy, or inclusive, as infinite and finite. The infinite includes the finite. Without permanence, essence, unity, and identity, concepts are empty and words become meaningless. So notice there are transcendentals necessary for thought. Permanence, essence, unity, and identity, and concepts. To deny the precondition for being in thought, to deny the ontological status of reason, to deny the logos in the world, is to leap into the abyss of personal and cultural nihilism, meaninglessness. So there are some things that are necessary for thought, necessary for discourse. Many have said reason cannot grasp reality for any number of reasons. Aquinas, going back to Aristotle's unmoved mover, and later Kant, encountered an antinomy regarding time and creation. The world had a beginning in time, and there never was a time when the world did not exist. See, there's a problem there, isn't there? The antinomy assumes that time itself did not begin with creation, an assumption arising from a failure to understand the nature of time as relative to change. Kant assumed reason cannot grasp the noumenal world. A priori categories are mind imposed on the world as we know it. Yet, to distinguish first among things in themselves, a chair in itself is not a table in itself, and then to make the chair in itself the cause of what appears, however much the mind shapes its input, is to know much about the noumenal world, making it not a totally unknown. Mahayana sutras decry the intellect as getting stuck in antinomies. Everything has a cause and nothing has a cause. Everything is eternal and nothing is eternal. But this is merely to assume that all is one and that contraries are indeed contradictories, which they're not. We'll talk about that soon. Again, it is thought that reason cannot grasp reality. For example, categorical reason cannot grasp the being of Christ as both infinite and finite. There's a footnote here. One must transcend categorical reason for a categorical reason and for meditative reason, or for a higher double-bracketed reason. But this is to assume a rational opposition between the infinite and the finite, rather than saying the infinite does and must include the finite. So the infinite is no beginning, no end, no limitations. The finite, beginning, end, possibly end, limitations. The infinite includes the finite. The finite does not include the infinite, though. The same is to be said of reason in relation to the Tao in Lao Tzu, or Anaximander's Apeiron, or Shankara's Nirguna Brahman. Convictions arrived at by not critically examining assumptions. So we'll look at those views as we go along. I don't want to bring them in right now, but just note they're there. You can listen to this again after we go through the section on metaphysics. Again, it is said that reason cannot grasp reality, for it cannot grasp the particular. True enough, reason does not give, nor does it claim to give, the fleeting particulars of sense impression, but it can grasp the abiding uniqueness of a particular. It can grasp the essence of Socrates, which characterizes Socrates through a lifetime of development and change. provided that the categories of analysis of personhood are sufficiently in place. Or it is said reason cannot grasp degrees, that the law of excluded middle is insufficient for this. Bald or not bald does not capture balding. But this is a faulty application. The categories rather should be balding or not balding, the latter being able to include both bald and not bald. Or it is said reason cannot grasp relationships. It separates A and non-A, but not both A and non-A at the same time. Having separated mind and body into exclusive categories, there is no middle term by which to relate them, precipitating the enigma and conundrum of the mind-body problem. Reason does affirm unity of diversity without reducing one to the other. The world is neither pure unity nor pure diversity, but by the law of non-contradiction, nothing is both A and non-A at the same time and in the same respect. But every being is a unity of A and non-A. Unity of diversity, and therefore relationship, is a given in all views. Whether something more complex can be explained by lesser diversity will depend on the rational analysis of elements of diversity. Lastly, it is said that rational coherence is insufficient for settling disputes between worldviews, for there are many equally logically possible worlds or worldviews. Is that true? And further, it cannot settle disputes within an inconsistent set of beliefs. Reason says both cannot be true, but it does not say which of the two is not true. These perceived limits of reason do not apply upon further analysis of what constitutes a worldview. In its essential and most basic features, there are not many possible worldviews. Either all is eternal in some form or another, material monism, spiritual monism, or dualism, or only some, God the Creator, is eternal. And it is clear to reason whether all or only some is eternal. See arguments in Part 2, Metaphysics, on what is real or eternal. If a worldview is incoherent in its essence, then all non-essential variations will also be incoherent. If any worldview is coherent in its essence, then non-essential differences in that world, for example, why is there X versus X plus 1 atoms or persons or units of evil in existence, may not now be known and may remain an unknown without unsettling what is known at the more basic level. In general, a worldview is not a set, but a system of beliefs, the less basic beliefs being built upon the more basic beliefs. When a less basic belief conflicts with a more basic belief, the less basic in that system must be given up. But reason, as most basic in every system, cannot be given up. There may be constructed alternative and coexisting systems of analysis beginning with different sets of axioms, several geometries, game theories, etc., which may or may not be compatible with the actual world. In neither case is there a philosophically relevant limit on reason to settle actual disputes in this world. So he covered a lot in this section, and it's pretty dense. You may have to read it again, think about it again, or read it in light of this section where he talks about worldviews. And the last source of skepticism is attitude, the fundamental source of skepticism. Ooh, what's your attitude like today? Philosophy is an attitude. It is the love of wisdom. It is also an application, that of self-examination, critically examining our basic beliefs for coherence of meaning. This attitude cannot be taken for granted as it does not appear to be widespread. To seek wisdom is to seek to know the good and the means to it. If the good is clear, it would appear that human beings do not ordinarily seek the good. We pursue what we believe is the good for ourselves as we conceive of the self. Our view of the good is based on our view of the self. That conception of self, however conflicted and incoherent, we take for granted. It is the self we love, defend, and seek to fulfill, come what may. We do not re-examine our view of ourself unless it is fundamentally challenged. We neglect, avoid, resist, and deny reason unless its demands become persistent and inescapable, at which point we have entered into a life crisis. We are forced, out of need for meaning, to reconsider basic things. As we move from the darkness of meaninglessness to the light of meaning, a new self is born, a new life begins. Short of this challenge and requirement of change, we do not seek and we do not understand basic things about God and man and good and evil. Rather, we are moved in justifying our view of self in all its conflicts and incoherence, whether we are learned or unlearned, whether by skepticism or fideism. Skepticism justifies itself over and against various forms of fideism, but not against its own incoherence. Disputes between skepticism and fideism, therefore, are interminable. They won't end. An inherent consequence of explicitly or implicitly denying that some things are clear to reason. So notice, we will defend ourself, our view of ourself, unless it's challenged, and it's usually challenged by meaninglessness. We're forced out of need for meaning to reconsider basic things about God, man, good, evil. And skepticism can't get us answers, and we'll find fideism can't either. Fideism is not a good response to skepticism. So I'm going to pause here, and in the next video, we will look at sources of fideism. Let me see if we're going to have to cut this one in half too, because it's also lengthy. Yeah, there's a lot here. So notice the kinds of things that are keeping us from having knowledge of basic things, knowledge of what is clear. So we've gone through several sources of skepticism. I encourage you to read through this section of the book, listen to the videos a couple times, and try to get your mind around what is causing skepticism in yourself, in the people around you, in the spheres of influence that you have, and in the culture. Okay, thank you for working through these ideas with me. I hope that you will like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Get them involved in the conversation. We need to get philosophy going on strong foundations again. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next video.